After blowing another late lead on Sunday, the Mets' month of August will be defined as the month of missed opportunities.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. Well, as we're going to talk about more in the next segment, the month of August has been the month of missed opportunities. There's been a lot of games that the Mets have had in hand where the bullpen has blown leads late, and it has cost this team as they now go into the final week of August with a losing record this month, when it very well could be the other way because there's so many games that could have gone the other direction, and today is the perfect example of that. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can point the finger on why the Mets didn't win this game. First of all, the offense. They only scored 2 runs. JD Martinez hit a solo home run in the 4th inning, and then Mark Vientos hit a solo home run in the 7th inning. But what I will say about the offense in this game, the Padres have a really good bullpen, and the Mets got into that bullpen early, and that's not necessarily a good thing. The 4th inning, they had Martin Perez on the ropes. JD Martinez hit that home run. He then walked 3 consecutive batters. Francisco Lindor was coming up with the bases loaded, and you sort of envisioned another opportunity for Lindor swinging from the right side of the plate to hit a grand slam and put the Mets up big. Padres were not going to risk that. They go to the bullpen to get Brian Hoeing, and he strikes out Lindor. That was one of the most pivotal at-bats of the game. If Lindor could have come through in that spot, got a base hit even, the whole complexion of the game might be different. But credit to the Padres, because their bullpen is one of the best in baseball right now, and they showed that down the stretch, and that's what made this game one where the Mets had to win 2-0. Or for a while, it looked like 1-0 until Vientos hit that home run in the 7th inning, and Jose Quintana did enough for that 1 run to hold up through the first 6 innings. He was great. We were really questioning what Quintana would bring to this team moving forward. The last time he pitched, I did a show the next day where I basically broke down why the Mets were stuck with Jose Quintana. And in that podcast, I talked about the fact that there had been a lot of peaks and valleys for Jose Quintana, but he had generally been able to steady the ship, and he was the Mets' best option. I talked about how an injury could pop up, and you would be really screwed when it comes to your depth if the Mets did make some move on Quintana after his last blow-up start. So obviously that was never in play. Sure enough, Paul Blackburn gets hurt. We'll talk about that later in the show as well. But Quintana is going to be in this rotation for the rest of the season. And today we saw why, because when he's right, when he has that good sinker, the good changeup, today had a good curveball as well, when he's able to attack the bottom of the zone and just below the zone, he's able to get that soft contact, or at least get that hard contact on the ground, and his defense can play great behind him. We saw it again today. Jose Iglesias and Francisco Lindor up the middle are so much fun to watch. Iglesias today made an incredible diving play where he had to use his back foot from the ground. He was laying down. He had to reach out with his foot to tag the base for a force out, a play that only Jose Iglesias would make, and would make in that way. And that was just one of many great plays by the Mets defense, as Quintana did what we saw David Peterson do the night prior, which is just keep the ball in the yard, pitch to contact, let his defense do the work. And through 6 innings, everything was great for the Mets. They sent Quintana back out there for the 7th, and I did not necessarily like that decision. I would have preferred to see Jose Butto get a clean inning to start, but Carlos Mendoza's rationale was that you had Manny Machado coming up, but then the 2 lefties after him in Peralta and Jackson Merrill, so he wanted Quintana to stay in there to face those lefties. Now he gives up a hit to Machado, gets an out, and then he gives up, or he walks a batter to put 2 on, then Butto comes on. Now, Jose Butto did his job early, right? He got through that inning. He got 1 big out, and then the Mets caught Jackson Merrill trying to steal second. Great play by Lindor as Merrill comes off the bag, and it's sort of a race to get back to it and Lindor gets the tag on him to get out of that inning. And you thought that that was the momentum swinging play that would keep the momentum on the Mets side, and they were going to be able to get those last 6 outs. But the 8th inning just was not kind to Jose Butto. He fell behind on the first batter and ends up getting him out, coming back in on him, and is able to get the first out of the inning. Then he got ahead of Mason McCoy, the 9th hitter, 0-2, and then he loses him. And that was really the pivotal at bat of that inning. Obviously, Jurickson Profar hits the home run after it, but when you're winning by 2, you can't walk the 9th hitter. You just can't do it. Had he gotten Mason McCoy out and Jurickson Profar hits a solo home run, maybe the whole game is different. But instead, he walks him, gives up the 2-run homer to Profar, tie a ball game, gets one more out, then gives up another base hit. Phil Maton comes on, gets the final out of the 8th. But things were still tied 2-2. You felt, though, when that home run left from Profar, that the game was lost because it was tied up. Padres had all the momentum at home. And with that bullpen, it just did not feel like the Mets were going to score, particularly until they got a ghost runner. I had some hope that maybe the Mets could force it to extras, get that ghost runner in, and maybe we'd see either Edwin Diaz with a 2-inning save, or in that case, it would just been a win, or someone surprising like Reed Garrett coming on and stranding a runner, getting some strikeouts. But it never got that far because Edwin Diaz pitches the 9th inning, tie ball game, gets the first strikeout, but then going up against Jackson Merrill, throws 2 fastballs that are way out of the zone. Easy takes for Merrill. It's behind 2-0. And honestly, at that point, I think his biggest mistake was giving him anything he could hit. He tried to go with the slider low and in, and maybe it was supposed to be well low and in, right? Regardless, he misses his spot in a big way, leaves it basically hanging right down the middle. And Jackson Merrill has been the Padres' clutch hitter this year. He delivers the walk-off home run, and there you go. That is a huge missed opportunity from the Mets, where they had a chance to win a series, a 4-game set against one of the teams you're chasing. You had a 2-0 lead with 6 outs to get, and they couldn't get the job done. I wish Edwin Diaz would have just completely pitched around Jackson Merrill. That's not the guy that is the guy you should be avoiding. That's the guy that can beat you. The guys behind him, go ahead, pitch against Kyle Higashioka in the bottom of that lineup. But instead, he gives him something they can handle, and the Mets go home losers. Split the series, and I think one thing you could say is the Mets were in every single game. Well, I guess not necessarily the game with Paul Blackburn having to blow up and getting hurt, but they were, in 3 of the 4 games. They won half of them, and they really were in a position to win this series, and they just came up a little bit short. The problem is you're running out of time. And what I want to talk about in the next segment is the missed opportunities this month and how they've come back to haunt the Mets in this wild card race. We'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website that is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you get the live graphic sent to your phone each day, so news in the starting 9 without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. This month, the New York Mets have a record of 11-12. When it comes to the series they have played, they've won 3, they've lost 3. They got swept in one of those 3 losses, and they split this 4-game set. If we go back, though, there's been a lot of blown opportunities this month that could have changed the complexion of where the Mets are in the race right now. Second game of the month, the Mets are playing the Angels. They had already taken the first game to open up that series. JD Martinez hits a grand slam late to give the Mets a 4-2 lead in the 7th inning. Huascar Brazoban comes on to pitch in the bottom of that inning. He gives up a 3-run homer that ultimately cost the Mets that game. They should have won that game, or they would have won the series, and then maybe the momentum is different going into the final game. Instead, they lose that final game by a score of 3-2. The bats just never got going. I don't believe the Mets led in that game. Then you have the Mariners series about a week later, where the Mets just looked horrible. They get swept. Now, I wouldn't say that was a missed opportunity, but it's just worth mentioning that after the Mariners looked so good beating up on the Mets, they lose 5 games in a row. I think the game after they lost like 15-1 against the Tigers. Just crazy. They end up losing 8 of 9 after the series against the Mets, and they fire their manager. So that's not even a missed opportunity. It's just crummy luck because we saw the Mariners played exceptionally well in that series against the Mets, and then they fell apart. So just bad timing. After that, the Mets played the A's. They are in line to win that series. They're up 5-0 in the final game. Jose Quintana's on the mound, has a blow-up inning, gives up 4 runs in that 4th inning. Mets still hold a lead, though. Then you get another run. I believe it was a Vientos home run, but don't quote me on that. Mets are up 6-4. Huascar Brazoban comes on. Getting a theme? Brazoban gives up a run. Then Reed Garrett comes on. Mets still leading. He gives up 2 runs. Mets end up losing that game by a score of 7-6. Brazoban and Garrett. It's the same duo that'll cost you in the next series because the Mets win the first 2 games against the Marlins. They're in line for a sweep. They're up 2-1 late. Brazoban gives up a run to tie it. Garrett gives up a run, and the Marlins end up winning that game by a score of 3-2. 3 games right there where Brazoban was a center figure in all of them, and Garrett was a central figure in 2 of them. Those games have really come back to haunt the Mets. And then you had the one today where it was it was Jose Budo and it was Edwin Diaz that blow it. If those 4 games go the other way, the Mets win that series against the Angels, they win the series against the A's, they sweep the Marlins, and they win this series against the Padres. Instead of being 3-3 with a split this month when it comes to series, the Mets would be 5-1. Or actually, they would have been 6-1. Excuse me. They would have won that one against the Angels, the one against the A's. That flips 2 losses into wins, and then they would have also had that sweep over the Marlins. Bottom line, their record this month would have been 15-8 instead of 11-12 right now. Their record on the season would be 72-59. The Padres, because they wouldn't have won today, would be 73-59. Mets would have been a half a game back of San Diego, game and a half ahead of the Braves. Instead, they blow an opportunity to get within a game and a half of the Braves today by losing. The Braves lost as well. So they're still sitting at 2.5 games back with 31 games to play. That's not too big of a mountain to climb. The Mets can do it. And this week, the Braves have a tough time against the Twins and then a 4-game set against the Phillies, and the Mets can beat the Diamondbacks and handle their business against the White Sox, they could be right back in this race. But even then, let's just say by the end of this week, the Mets are even with the Braves. You could have been 3 or 4 games up on the Braves. But all these missed opportunities have accumulated, and it's hurt this team in a big way as you head down the stretch. It doesn't mean they can't still do it, but is the bullpen all of a sudden going to be lights out from this point on? That's the big thing. And look, you can knock Edwin Diaz all you want to. Blame this season on him, and there's certainly plenty of games that you can blame on Edwin Diaz. He had been very good lately, and this was a bad pitch that he made today. Not to excuse it. To me, I look more toward Brazoban because he was a part of 3 of the 4 games the Mets should have won. And he's now back on your roster because Paul Blackburn got hurt, and he's with the club, so he's right back in the mix. But this has been a month that could define the Mets season because they had an exceptional June, exceptional July, and they could have had a very strong August. Imagine if they were 15-8 in the month right now. Riding high against the Diamondbacks. Let's say they win that series and they win the first 2 games of the series against the White Sox to close out this month because the final game will take place on September 1st. All of a sudden, what is that, a 19-9 month? and the Mets would have been probably holding down a spot in the wild card the entire time. Instead, they had a brief cameo at the end of July in a playoff spot, and now the Braves are holding on. And there's something to be said about the emotional element towards being in that playoff spot and out of it. You know, the day that the Mets beat the Braves with Kodai Senga on the mound and they took that spot, it felt like a big tonal shift in the race. And then they gave that momentum right back. And now the Braves haven't even played their best baseball. All of a sudden, they're sort of figuring it out. They won a game this weekend on an error, by the Nationals. Things are just starting to go their way. Now, that might not hold up. That could be some fool's gold for them, and maybe they do fall back. But 31 games left in this season. The Mets have to put together a winning streak at some point. Maybe it's this week. But they can't just keep their head above water. They can't just win a series, lose a series. They either have to consistently win series over series from this point on till the end of the season, or they have to go on a streak at some point, win a bunch of games, get a lead, and then do their best to hold on at the end. But this was a game today that is really frustrating because they had it. They were 6 outs away, and it wasn't Braziban on the mound. It wasn't Reed Guerra on the mound. It wasn't Adam Ottavino or Ryan Stanek on the mound. It was your two best relievers, and hats off to the Padres for hitting the ball over the wall. But you look at both of the pitches that led to the home runs. For Budo, a sinker that was way too high. It was belt high for Profar. Easy pitch to drive if you're looking for something hard. And then for Jackson Merrill, the guy that you can't let beat you in that spot, and you give him a hanging slider right down the middle. Bad loss. And now let's say you lose to the Diamondbacks in this upcoming series. You might be in danger of having a losing month of August, and that might just be the thing that puts this season too far out of reach when it's all said and done. We'll see how it all shakes out. We have some injury news to discuss in the final segment. Paul Blackburn did go on the IL, how the Mets managed that, and also Brett Baty could be done for the year. We'll talk about both those injuries in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little different for you now, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now with YouTube TV's base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. Again, this is for all FanDuel customers, where all you have to do is bet that $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, Paul Blackburn hit the IL today with that bruised hand. It's retroactive to Saturday, August 24th, so he can return Sunday, September 8th. What does that mean for the Mets? Well, as I talked about on yesterday's show, if they're smart, and I think they are, they're going to probably line up their rotation to face the Diamondbacks with Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, and David Peterson. The only reason why they wouldn't is if there are some splits that favor right-handed pitching, where maybe the Diamondbacks are better versus lefties than righties. I haven't looked those up yet. Previewing the series on tomorrow's show since we got the off day today. And we'll see if the Mets make this announcement prior to that. But to me, it makes all the sense in the world to pitch David Peterson in this series. You have the off day, so he'd be going on regular rest. You line up your best 3 starting pitchers to face that really tough Diamondbacks team. Then over the weekend, you got the White Sox. So Tyler McGill is going to make a start. I don't see anybody else joining this rotation. Brandon Sproat, if he had pitched lights out in AAA, sure, he didn't. Mike Vassell, if he was pitching lights out in Syracuse, I guess, gave up 7 runs in his last start. Actually, you know what? He had a better start this week. I think he gave up 4 and got a win. So a little bit of dated news there. I think it was 5 2/3, 4 runs. Don't quote me. I know he got a win and definitely pitched better in his most recent start, but the prior one gave up 7 runs. He's not on the 40-man roster. Yes, you might have to protect him if you want to keep him this offseason. They're not going to do that. Tyler McGill is going to make the start, okay? It's going to be him. The question is just, when does he start? Does he start ahead of Peterson or after Peterson? And also, it could be after Quintana if the Mets want to, and I think it probably makes sense to do that because the following series, you play the Red Sox. I looked at the splits there. The Red Sox are the second best team in baseball when facing right-handed pitching. The only team better, the Yankees. This is by OPS. So I'd imagine the Mets would prefer to have 2 lefties go in that series. So if Quintana starts on Friday against the White Sox, he'd be good to go for the final game of that series, the following one against the Red Sox. Now, this basically means Tyler McGill will get a start against the Chicago White Sox on Saturday, if my assumptions are correct. And then he would start against the Reds. I believe it would be the following Friday. Now, Blackburn can come back on that Sunday. The way the rotation would line up, you'd basically have McGill make the start against the White Sox, the start against the Reds. You get an extra arm in your bullpen. And then when Paul Blackburn, a couple days after Blackburn would be available to come off the IL, he would start a game, I believe, on September 11th. I think if that's how everything would probably shake out here. We'll see. You never know. Blackburn's hand might not heal. Maybe Tyler McGill has 2 incredible starts, and you want to take your time on Blackburn and let McGill roll a little bit. Maybe one of those guys ends up in the bullpen. More likely McGill. We'll see. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But what we know for now, Blackburn is on the IL. The Mets will have Huascar Brazaban in the bullpen. I don't know if you want that, but he's going to be there for this upcoming series against the Diamondbacks. And then when you need a starter against the White Sox, assuming they don't go to McGill early, it'd be Tyler McGill, and he will get those 2 starts. All right, the other big injury news today is that Brett Baty is out likely for the season. Now, I should have mentioned this on the show because I've noticed it. The fact that Baty got pulled from a game early and hadn't been in the lineup for a couple of days. Turns out he got hit in the hand, fractured his left index finger, and he's out for 4 to 6 weeks, which based on where we're at in the season means he's probably done for the year. So just a rough season for Brett Baty. He was starting to get hot too. 5 home runs, 2 doubles in his last 10 games played. Now he's done. He was hitting 261, 358 on base, 528 slug in AAA. It's an 886 OPS. Good, not great numbers. 16 home runs in 58 games. That's pretty good. Next year, we'll see what happens with Brett Baty. He had a 633 OPS with the big league club in 50 games. Definitely not guaranteed a roster spot by any stretch. I think there's probably a competition for a sort of super util bench role between Brett Baty and Ronnie Mauricio in spring training next year, maybe Luis Angel Acuna, where he could back up at second and third. Maybe they ask him to get some reps in the outfield, and all of a sudden Brett Baty, who looked like the future starting third baseman for the New York Mets, is now a guy that maybe has to play all over to get some of his time, and he's sort of on the outside looking in because Mark Vientos has solidified that position. Now, there is a world where Pete Alonso walks in free agency. The Mets decide that Mark Vientos is best suited to be your first baseman of the future. You have him work there in the offseason. That's your answer at that position. Third base becomes more of a competition between Baty, Mauricio, Acuna, whoever else. And that's the direction the Mets go. Maybe they sign somebody. You could just see them bring back Jose Iglesias. I think there's a world where Pete Alonso walks, you bring back Iglesias, and then you just see how your roster shakes out when it's all said and done. In that scenario, though, I think Vientos would make the move over to first. But the way he's playing at third, I feel like you might want to just keep him there. So we'll see what happens with Brett Baty. Definitely a big blow to him because he was going to get an opportunity, I believe, in September. I think the Mets were going to call him up because he had that second base versatility. I thought he was going to be the guy. Now, kind of looking like Luis Angel Acuna. The options on the 40-man roster are Acuna, Alex Ramirez, and DJ Stewart. Alex Ramirez isn't hitting in AA. It's not going to be him. DJ Stewart is getting on base at a 441 clip in AAA. He's only got 2 home runs, though, and 50 at-bats. And what would his role be? Because Jesse Winker really fills the type of role that DJ Stewart was serving prior to getting sent down. So I just don't see why you would bring up another guy to be the left-handed power bat off your bench. Now, you would say, well, why were they going to call up Brett Baty? At least Brett Baty gave you that option while also providing really good defense at third base when you needed him, second base. It made more sense. And it's a young player that you are pouring some development in, letting him be part of a stretch run where you're in the mix. DJ Stewart, what's his future with the Mets? I don't see it. I think Acuna makes a ton of sense for this team. Very similar to years ago where Eric Young Jr. was added. I believe it was the 2015 Mets. And they just brought him back out of nowhere to be that pinch runner. And, I don't remember exactly how well he did in that role, but I do remember that season. It was, Eric Young Jr. just got brought back as a September call-up, and he's just there to run. I think that would basically be what you'd have with Acuna. Yes, he could play defense all over. He can play good center field. He'd be a backup shortstop, second, even third if you wanted to in a pinch. But I don't think he would really play and get starts over Iglesias, McNeil, certainly not Lindor, or anybody in the outfield. I think he would come up, hey, you get to enjoy this ride with us, and when you need a stolen base, Acuna could come into the game and steal a base, and then he'd have the positional flexibility to stay in that close game wherever you needed to put him in the outfield or the infield. So I think we're going to see Acuna actually now as a September call-up. Didn't think so before this injury, but now I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't Acuna as the position player that gets the call, unless they wanted to get somebody off of the roster, whether that be a Luke Ritter, Mike Brasso. There's a couple other guys. We'll talk about it as we get closer to that point in time. But for Baty, rough end to his season. For Acuna, potentially an opportunity has opened up. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, I will definitely be previewing the upcoming series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. We'll get into some other good stuff as well. Make sure if you're listening to the show today, you follow, you rate, you review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.